Hey guys, Tyler Berger here with Bass Fishing HQ, and today I want to tell you why you might be fishing dead zones in late summer and early fall. So stay tuned, it's going to be a good one. So in this video, I really want to talk about that late summer, early fall time, that transition that happens. What happens a lot of times in the lakes that you are fishing is there actually are dead zones. There's areas that are literally depleted of oxygen. There's no fish in them. There's no bass in them. You can actually be fishing in these oxygen depleted areas and literally not catching anything, and you think you're throwing the wrong lure or whatever it may be, but it's actually just because you are in the wrong depth zone. You are fishing in an oxygen depleted area. So today I want to talk about lake stratification as well as the fall turnover, which can be a very difficult time to fish. I always want to give credit where credit's due, and a lot of the information that I got for this video was from a video I watched several years back by Hat Cam Bass. Just wanted you guys to know that. All right guys, in order to best show the dead zones on the lake that you may be fishing, I thought I'd go ahead and bring out the dry erase board. So what is going to happen in late summer is your lake is going to stratify. What that basically means is the water column is going to separate into 3 different layers. Now, not every single lake does this. If you're fishing a lake that has a lot of current, maybe it's a river system, maybe it's just susceptible to a lot of wind, it won't always stratify. But I've seen this happen in a lot of bigger impoundments and lakes, and it actually even happens in ponds. So let me explain lake stratification. So what we have here is the lake bottom. Here is the surface. In late summer, what you typically have is you have a lot of sunshine and you have a lot of very, very warm temperatures, right? And so that warm temperature and sunlight is going to heat up the water. So when that water really starts to rise up there in temperature is typically when the water starts to stratify, when it starts to separate. So this top layer up here is what's called the epilymnium. I'm gonna put an E just for you guys to remember. Now, a couple of things to know about the top layer is that this top layer is typically warm water. And not only is it warm water, but it also has a lot of oxygen in it. This is where you have a ton of O2 in your water column. All right, now I drew another line, and there's actually a second layer here and then a third layer down here. Now let's talk about the third layer first. This is called the hypolimnium. I'll put an H over here. Now, what's really important to know about the hypolimnium is that this is cold water down here, or cool water is what I'm gonna put. The other thing to know about this hypolimnium, this bottom layer, is that this layer has very little, if any, O2 in it. So I'm gonna put no O2. So this bottom layer is the dead zone. This is the part of the lake that you could actually be fishing in and not catching any fish. So we have the epilymnium, we have the hypolimnium, and this layer in between is probably the one that you have heard of the most, and this is actually called the metalimnium. And I'm gonna put an M here, and actually what you hear a lot of people say when they talk about it is the thermocline. This is kind of the big separation in between the warm layer and the cool layer. The warm layer up here is less dense water. The colder water gets, the more dense it becomes. That's why this colder water down here is very dense. That's also why it's on the very bottom. That's gonna be really key when we talk about the fall turnover in just a little bit. It might actually seem a little bit backwards, but in June or July, in early summer, you might be catching fish in 20 foot of water. But as that thermocline starts to develop later in the year, later during the summer, those fish actually might move shallower. You might think, hey, I need to go fish in 25 and 30 foot of water during August and September, but because of that thermocline, it might be at 15 foot of water, so therefore there's going to be no bass in 25 and 30 foot of water at all. So the thing you should know about the thermocline is there's a ton of change that occurs in that thermocline, in that metalimnium layers. You might have 85-degree water here on the surface, and down here you actually might have 70-degree water at the very bottom of the lake. Now for the example that I'm using here, I'm also gonna say that the thermocline is in between 20 foot and 30 foot deep. So in between that 20 and 30 foot depth is where you see the temperature really change a whole lot. And then after you get to that lower part of the thermocline, you're gonna have very little change all the way down to 70 degrees. So for instance, it actually might just be like 73 degrees right here. It's not gonna change a whole lot in this whole area, no change in this area. But in this 10-foot section here, that's where that water temperature changes drastically. Now, it's really important to know that the degrees that I used here are fictitious, okay? I made them up, but they represent exactly what really happens on the lake. Now, you have the exact same type of graph that happens when it comes to oxygen. For instance, we know that bass love 8 milligrams per liter of O2. Okay, and up here on this area, you might have 8 milligrams of O2. So down at the very bottom of the lake, you might have almost 0 oxygen. You might have like a decimal, like 0.1 or 0.5 oxygen down here. But the same kind of curve is gonna happen. So in between the surface and the top of the thermocline, you're gonna have very little change in the O2. This also might be 8 down here. Here in the thermocline, again, is where you're gonna have a drastic change in the O2 levels. This line right here in the middle might be 5 milligrams per liter, and this one down here might be about 2 milligrams per liter. So then it's gonna drop down to being very little oxygen at all at the bottom like we talked about. Now, what we know from scientific data is that bass really love that zone between 5 and 8 milligrams per liter of oxygen, which is really kind of on the top part of the thermocline layer and also just above it. This is the area you're gonna find a lot of those deeper bass in late summer. For instance, they might be in 18 to 22 foot. And then bass can also be anywhere in that top layer. So maybe you go up into a cove or a pocket where there's some grass, and those fish might only be 5 or 6 foot down. They can really be anywhere. So the big thing to remember in late summer is don't fish in the dead zone. This area down here below the thermocline, those bass are not gonna be there. Anything below that 2 milligrams per liter is considered lethal to fish. Bass are not gonna be in that area. Not all lakes are gonna have a thermocline at the exact same level. Some lakes it might be in 15 foot of water, other lakes it might be in 30 foot of water. And even if you're fishing the same lake, it might be at different levels on that same lake. So towards the bottom of the dam, it might be in 30 foot of water, but if you get mid-lake or up the lake, it might be in 15 foot of water. Now you might be asking, Tyler, how do you know what the thermocline looks like? And really guys, even if you have a basic sonar, a 2D sonar on your boat, if you kind of crank up some of the sensitivity, you're gonna be able to see the thermocline kind of come in. It almost looks like a giant cloud of bait fish. It's just gonna be some noise there, and that's gonna be your thermocline. So as late summer progresses, you start to get into fall. And as fall starts to come around, you're gonna start having some cooling water temperatures. So let me show you what happens in the fall turnover and why bass fishing can be difficult and what you can do to try to catch more bass during that time. I'm gonna erase a couple of things here. All right guys, so in this kind of portion, just to the side of this, I'm gonna show you what happens in a fall turnover. So as fall progresses, we start to get cold nights and even colder air temperatures throughout the day. So we're gonna have colder air temperatures. That's going to start cooling off that top layer. Now remember that top layer is about 85 degrees and this bottom layer is about 70 degrees. So this layer up here is gonna be going from 85 degrees and then it's gonna go to 80 degrees. And then it's gonna go to 75 degrees as it continues and continues to cool. As that water temperature on the top surface is getting colder, it's also getting more dense. And then guess what? Eventually it's going to hit 70 degrees. And at this point, the top layer is the same temperature and density as the bottom layer. When this happens, you have what is known as the fall turnover. Basically, those two layers are going to mix together. And now the entire water column from top to bottom, it's going to be the same water temperature and density and oxygen. Now, typically when this happens, you're gonna know because you're gonna go to the lake, and maybe your lake is a fairly clean body of water. You're gonna get there one day and that water is just gonna look off, right? Sometimes it can be like a weird bluish or greenish color, and sometimes you will actually notice an odor. It will actually smell a little bit funky, and that's when you know you're experiencing the fall turnover. Now, the turnover is probably gonna last anywhere from 3, 4, 5 days long. The thing that makes bass fishing really difficult during the fall turnover is instead of the bass being kind of in this middle layer and upper layer, now they have this whole water column to work with, and they can really be in this entire water column. So bass can actually move a little bit deeper if they want to. You may have been catching them in that 18 to 22 foot of water, but now those fish actually might be able to get down to 25 and 30 foot. And so it spreads those fish out, which really makes it seem very difficult. Now, the other thing you will have happen during a fall turnover is a little bit of an oxygen depletion, because you have this huge area down here that was really void of oxygen mixing with the layer up here that has a lot of oxygen, and now that oxygen is just kind of dispersed throughout the entire area. So guys, if you are experiencing a fall turnover in the lake that you are fishing, there are 3 things that I do in order to catch bass, and I'm gonna name them. I'm gonna erase some of this right here. The first thing that I look for anytime you have a fall turnover is grass. Anywhere that you have grass on your lake, which is typically in a little bit shallower water, not always, but typically in that 8 foot and less, you're gonna have a lot of oxygen in that area. And as long as the grass is healthy looking, as long as it's green and crispy, there's typically going to be fish in that area. Now, the second thing that I do in a fall turnover situation is I focus on the creeks and rivers that are feeding that lake. And here's the thing, I'm gonna run as far up those creeks and those rivers as I can. As long as you have 3, 4 foot of water, there's gonna be a large population of bass that aren't affected by any of the turnover or any of the thermocline changes, and you're gonna be able to catch a lot of fish in the creeks and rivers feeding that lake. So the other thing I like to focus on is shallow shoals. You know, on the bottom of the lake, when that fall turnover happens, that can be a really difficult time to catch fish kind of offshore. But a lot of lakes, you're gonna have shallow shoals. They're gonna be points and shoals and even creek channel edges, but you wanna focus on the ones that are really shallow. And when I'm saying shallow, I'm talking 2 foot, 3 foot, 4 foot maximum depth on top where they drop into the river channel. That's another prime area. That really shallow water is gonna be an area where you can catch active bass that are looking for a big threadfin shad or gizzard shad. So guys, I hope that this helps you to understand that late summer to early fall transition period. If you guys wanna watch a complete guide on the fall fishing, check out this link right here. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys in the next video.